Thank you for tuning into this video. I didn't expect to be posting a video about building a ship model. Instead, I just thought I'd be talking about how to paint them based on what the instructions say, because so few people out there post pictures of painting their Star Trek ships as the instructions that come with them say, because the instructions can be woefully inaccurate. However, I could not pass this opportunity up, because we are on the 50th anniversary of Watergate. It's become such a cliche, overused phrase to just attach gate at the end of anything you don't like. Gamergate, Spygate, all that sort of stuff. Russiagate. But Watergate was where it originated, and here we have a starship, ISS Nixon. Before I get to the origin of the ship, though, start with the number, 1790. There's no particular significance to that. I wanted to do 1972 or 1973. Those are the years during which Watergate unfolded, but that would have been too late in the registration scheme, in my opinion. By that point, the ships would not be looking like this one. So I wanted to do an earlier one. And also, as you'll see later, this ship is supposed to be an older one that's been around the bend a few times, a little beaten up by the time it goes in for a refit to make it a nice brand new ship. So it had to be a lower number than 19 whatever, which led me to want to pick something in the 17 range, maybe early 18. Someone on eBay actually had something in the early 18 range saying that that was ISS Nixon, but I don't know where they got that number from. So instead, I figured I'd just go with the licensed works. What numbers are available in the licensed works? And I went through them, and I saw all the names attached to the different numbers. None of them, of course, were Nixon. There is no number for Nixon. I did figure out, though, that one of the numbers, 1790, it was attached to a star, but that also happened to be the name for a planet. And in the Star Trek book, The Abode of Life, that's where the planet was. So I figured, well, Evil Empire, they're going to name themselves after a famous dictator or whatever from the past. They're not going to name it after some random alien planet that doesn't even have faster than light travel, that, in fact, they might never have even encountered. So in 1790 got freed up, became the Nixon. I was reading over some DC comics from the 80s. I'm gonna here's the thing that I had. It was a compilation of them, and in this set of comics, the Enterprise crew ends up in the evil parallel universe that it's otherwise called the Mirror Universe. That's for those of you who aren't quite sure where this is going. And in the evil universe, they named a starship the Nixon. As you can see, it's not exactly the same configuration as the model that I built, but the model that I built was a refit into this new configuration here. And I just, the moment I saw it in the comic, I had the urge to build it, but I didn't want to build the model kit that looks like that because that thing is very horrible and complicated. I wanted to build the basic AMT Enterprise model kit that's been around since the late 60s because it is so easy to put together. And so we got ISS Nixon. And it was only after that that I realized it was 50 years of Watergate, so that became justification for making a video out of this, just because that was a historic event in American politics. So the kit that I chose, I covered in the last video, AMT Enterprise kit. This is from the mid-1980s, around 1986. You can see it's actually new in plastic when I got it. I got it for about 25 bucks. That's another reason why I went for this. These kits are very cheap for whatever the heck reason or other. It's actually cheaper to buy older ones off of eBay or something than it is to buy the newer releases in model stores. And this one, I could tell the date, even though it said it was copyright 1983, you could tell what date it was, around 86, because it came with these flyers on the inside. You can see here for attention model or something blueprinter, and very small font you can make out that says Star Trek 4, and Star Trek 4 came out in 1986. So this is all the paperwork that came with it. The instructions, the decal sheet, and for some reason 2 of those. Again, it was wrapped up in plastic, so why they put 2 of those flyers in there, I don't know. But I also had to order some additional parts, because the evil universe starships like this, they're slightly different. There's a reason for that. In the original show, when they first depicted the evil universe ship appearing, They simply reversed some footage and used footage of how the Enterprise Studio model appeared very early on, because the Enterprise Studio model was modified a couple of times along the course of the original show. So an earlier version appeared for like one scene as the evil Enterprise, and so fans after that decided, well, the evil Enterprise must look like this older version of the studio model just to distinguish it from the main universe one, I guess. And then when CBS redid the series with all new CGI special effects in the mid 2000s, they kept with that tradition. So I'm going to make it this ISS Nixon, it's going to look a little bit more like that one. And to that end, you had to buy new parts because the parts in the kit are very loosely based on the final version of the studio model, not the one that the evil ship is based on. So I had to buy, at the very end of those cylinders, which are the engines, you have little caps at the end there. You can see these on the far left. It says second pilot version aft nacelle cap. And all these parts came from FederationModels.com. So I had to replace those. I had also, you got this other one here that's the satellite dish on the bottom of the ship that was actually bigger in the older studio model. And then also they called them, you can see on the label, bussard collectors. Those are the domes at the end of the cylinders that are all glowy and orange and stuff in the series. Except actually in the older version of Studio Model, those were dark and kind of dark red, crimson in color. And also I had to get a new decal sheet. Can't really see it because of the glare here, but if you look carefully right about here, hopefully I remember to put an arrow in, you can see the sword through the earth. That is the symbol of the evil empire. And that symbol, it was all over the place on the inside of the ship. Right, you could see it on a bunch of doors. That's how they sort of visually differentiated it from the main universe. They just kind of stuck that all over the place on the inside. But on the outside, at least according to CBS, their model, you don't see that in any of the footage. You don't see that. Now, why would I be so obsessed with putting that there on the ship when you can't really see it in the TV show? Well, that's because of this. This here is, it's an accurate representation. It's by the company Eagle Moss. They went out of business. But this is the Enterprise from the series Star Trek Enterprise. They also did an episode where they went into the evil universe. And here you can see they went nutso with that sword through the earth thing. 3 times it appears on top of the ship, and it's got that gold crescent around the edges there. So you wouldn't think that the evil empire would suddenly become shy about posting its logo on their starships. However, in the 2006 CBS remaster, you don't see that logo anywhere on the outside of the ship. And of course, in the original episode, you didn't see it either because they weren't going to film new footage of the studio model. That would be way too expensive. However, there were a couple of blind spots, and here's a picture here, so I'm going to use that to illustrate it. There were a couple of blind spots in the footage, and I went through it carefully because this was the one thing about the model that I wanted to get right, that is placement of these symbols. And if you see other model kits out there and guides to how the ship should be detailed, they put the sword through the earth symbol all over the place, as much as it was on the Archer ship from Star Trek Enterprise in the early 2000s, which I just showed you, just all over the place like that. But again, not visible in either the original or remastered version of the episode. However, in the footage, there are blind spots. There are parts of the ship you do not see. They are very small, though. There is very little of the ship that you don't see in those episodes. So I just had to put the tiny little logo here on the back of the command section here. And hopefully I remember to put arrows here as well. And then you can also see the logo back here on the bottom part of the ship. You don't really see those areas that well or at all in the show. So we can assume that's where the logo went because, again, why would they suddenly become shy about putting their logo on their ships, especially given the nature of this empire, which is evil and braggadocious? Now, onto actually building the model. I'm going to cover a little bit of the flaws here of this AMT model kit. This kit, again, for those of you who didn't see the last video I did, it was spawned in 1966, 67, something like that, And they kept doing new releases on it right up through 1989, I think, perhaps a little beyond that even. And then they stopped for about 10 years, and then 15 years, and then they began doing them again with more modifications in 2008, 2009. However, the kind of 68 through 89 or early 90s kit had some flaws with how the kit was molded. You can see, for example, here the saucer, fresh out of the box, didn't touch it or anything except to pull it out of the box. You look at it, it's supposed to be a perfect circle, but look at all that gunk that I got to cut off the edges there in order to make it a circle. And then you see here how there's this random model tree that's stuck to the saucer. That model tree does not attach to anything. It is a very odd creative choice to put that there. But you got to do that. You got to cut that thing off, and it leaves some pretty bad gouges in the side if you don't do it right. A lot of filing. It's a mess. I don't know why they did that. But also, here's another same kit, but I built this one 10 years ago. And you can see here another flaw that will come up. It wasn't as pronounced in this kit, but it was actually the most exaggerated in the one that I built 10 years ago, as you can see here. This is the warp engine, and you can see the engine is warped. Couldn't resist that pun. But that's not me gluing it poorly or anything. As much as the bad paint job would indicate, I did actually do a very good, competent job of gluing this. It's just that the thing was so warped that it wouldn't attach right. You can see it folding up at the end here toward the red cap, and then you see it crumpling toward the back there. That's just how the piece was folded and butchered somehow by the production. Now, step one, though, for me doing this kit is to paint some parts. You can do this, I guess, in a different order. Probably be simpler in a different order in some cases, but this is how I learned to do it myself. Paint it first. So here you can see the color that I chose compared to the color of the original studio model. At the top there, that little tiny model of the Enterprise, that's from Eagle Moss again. And they painted it as best they could to match how the ship's studio model was painted. So you can see how radically different that coloration is already. However, I did screw up horribly. See, I used Battleship Gray for the color of the hull because I thought that's how the Evil Universe ships were painted. I just had that stuck in my head. It's actually supposed to be Gunmetal Gray. And it's been Gunmetal Gray apparently for 30 years now, because you can see it as far back as a Star Trek book published in the 90s called Dark Mirror, that the Evil Enterprise in that was described as being painted Gunmetal Gray. And when CBS did the ship for the 2006 digital remaster, they painted it Gunmetal Gray. Despite all that, I chose Battleship Gray because I'm an idiot. So that's what this ship ended up being painted as. And I was not going to repaint it, and I discovered the mistake too late anyway. Here it is compared to the ship that I covered in the last video, I.S.S. or U.S.S. Republic, because it's from the main universe. And already you can see vast differences between the two here, and here's all the parts that I had to spray paint. Here are the colors that I chose for this kit. It's not exactly Battleship Gray, it's IJN Gray, that is Imperial Japanese Navy Gray. But Curie Arsenal, or Curie Arsenal, I don't really know. I know it's not pronounced Cure. That's all I know how it's pronounced. And that's actually, this would make it the same color gray as the battleship Yamato was. So I figured, it's the Evil Empire. Maybe their starship would be the same color as another evil empire in our history. And that's on the far right there. Next to that is Hull Red. I just had that left over from a Navy ship that I was painting a while ago, and I used that to paint the domes at the end of the engines. So there's also gloss white next to that. That was used for just the domes on the top and bottom of the saucer. Then you have Uniform Luftwaffe World War II. I'll get to where I put that in a moment. It was not very prominent. And then you have gunmetal. I used that because some parts of the model are supposed to be painted black, but I decided to do gunmetal instead because there was supposed to be gunmetal gray, but I did not use that because I forgot, so here's gunmetal, making up for it, because at least it's something with gunmetal and it was used to paint the ship. And as for silver, I used that to paint just some small pieces. You can actually see one of them in the foreground under the gloss white and the whole red. This little piece here and 3 others like it. They go on the engines, and they're probably supposed to be the IJN gray, but I ran out of the spray paint, so these became silver. And I was going to spend $9 on the spray paint just to use a very tiny bit of it and never again use it ever for anything. And then finally, brass that was used for the big satellite dish on the ship, because that's about the color it is in the show. Now, the only paint that I had to buy for this was IJN gray. The rest I just had sitting around from past projects. Actually, the Luftwaffe was used on another Enterprise model. So here's masking the model for painting. Of course, you can see I did a horrible job with this altogether. And you can see actually on the engine part that's laying here, maybe I'll remember to put an arrow in, that I got a little smudge there. That's because when I was painting the gunmetal, the gunmetal strip along here, this middle area of the engine, I ended up splashing some on the other engine component laying there, and I couldn't wipe it off, and I wasn't about to use paint thinner because that might have thinned the battleship gray color, and like I said, I was out of that, so I couldn't replace it, so I just had to leave it as a smudge. And now towards the top, though, the upper right here, you see these rectangles. That's what's going to be the Luftwaffe color. It's supposed to really be just kind of a darker gray, but I didn't have a darker gray laying around, so I just used the Luftwaffe color instead, because, as you can see in this picture, it served about the same purpose. And you can also see how terrible my masking technique is, because of how all over the place this is. And maybe I'll remember to put an arrow here, but you'll see this little tiny hole in the middle here. It's right in bisecting the 4 rectangles here. It's right down the middle, right? Like there's 2 above it and 2 below it. That's part of the molding. That's another flaw with the molding here for the kit. I didn't put that there. It was there when I got the model. Don't know why or how or whatever, but again, there's just some problems with it. That's all. As far as those silver dots, though, you can see like 6 of them, 7 of them. That's because, gee whiz, that's 8 of them. It's because I was painting the silver parts and some silver paint splashed, and again, can't really wipe it off too well, but it was also was dry by the time I saw it. So it just ends up being some more detail on this ship. I'll just make it part of the backstory of the ship. This is towards the end of its service life before it got the refit to look like it did in the comic book. And it's been through a lot, and obviously this evil empire, they didn't take very good care of their equipment. Gee whiz, it has a kind of grungy look on the inside, so of course it would have a grungy look on the outside. Right, and now here's the bottom of the top part of the saucer. Right below the dome on top, here, since I wasn't going to use this part, this is actually, you can see here, I glued the dome that goes on the bottom of the saucer right here. That's because I needed something to plug those 2 holes, because the dome that I was going to put on top of the saucer wasn't even part of this kit. It was a different dome. And because the evil starship, the version of the Enterprise Studio model that it resembles, its dome sticks out more than the final version. So I decided to replace it with a dome that stuck out more, but needed to plug those holes there because they might have shown through, and I didn't want that. So I just took advantage of the spare part that I had laying around and put it there. Now here's another example of the mold not being right. This is the engine. And as you saw on the other one that was warped, this one just seems, all of them that I put together, they seem to have this problem where they stick out like this. You can see how it's not aligned right, except the problem is that's not a testament to my poor gluemanship. This is actually seems to be how it's supposed to be aligned, because on the interior space of each half, there's a male end on one side sticking out, and there's a female end, a hole for the male end to stick into on the other side of the on the second piece. So piece 1 actually does have little holes or little slots that on piece 2 that it fits into. This is how it looks when it's aligned like that. All the holes and slots, everything's aligned on the inside. The trouble is, I guess they were placed at the wrong distance or whatever, so it ends up looking like this. It's totally misaligned somehow. Like can't really explain it any more better than that, other than poor molding on their part. So I just kind of take a knife and cut off that part there that's extra. And here's another problem here. You have the engineering section that the engines plug into and the saucer sits on top of. You can see I'm holding it by the neck, and you can see this is the back end here. And you can see by that little space in the middle that each piece here, there's only two pieces, and one piece has the neck and has a quarter of the lower cylinder, and that's the top piece. The bottom piece has part of the neck and has the other half of the neck and another quarter of the lower cylinder. And you can see here that the back quarter cylinder is sticking out up a little bit. Hopefully got an arrow here so you can see exactly where that is. But then on this next picture, you can see that same thing that was sticking up on the one end is actually sticking down on this end. So the problem is, though, here's the neck. You can see the neck is perfectly aligned. So even though the bottom half of the pieces, the bottom halves of the pieces, I should say, are not aligned with each other, their top halves are. And if you were to align the bottom halves with each other, the top halves would be misaligned. So again, just some issues with the molding there. And now here it is, the whole cylinder put together. The bottom half is just one piece. And you can see that it's sticking out, the top halves are sticking out to the sides of the bottom half. And you can see that they're about even as far as how much they're sticking out. Don't mind the Enterprise D and the Klingon battlecruiser in the background. I had the super glue out because those additional parts that I showed you towards the beginning, those regular model glue probably I don't think would have worked on them because they're not made of the same model plastic as this is made out of. So I used super glue instead. I know I could have just Googled what glue would work for all of them, but I had the super glue already, so take advantage of it. And I also used it to put back together these Eagle Moss ships. The battle cruiser arrived broken, and I broke the Enterprise D sometime a few years ago and only just now got back to putting it back together. But here's an interesting point, though. You saw how wildly misaligned the pieces were on the front end, how they were sticking out evenly on either side, right? Well, here's the back end, and you see how on the left side it's perfectly aligned, but the right side is sticking out a little bit. So again, just more weirdness because of how the kit is molded. And here are the replacement parts that I mentioned. They're in the bag. And the reason I have brought this up is because they make it, the guys who made these extra pieces, they made it so complicated. You don't have to do as complicated as they want you to do. You see that piece on my thumb? That's the original piece. Well, they want you to cut that dome off and replace it with their dome. And their dome has a little hole in it that you glue the spike in. The spike is the only part we care about here, because the spike is, again, part of what differentiates the evil Enterprise from the regular Enterprise. In the earlier version of the studio model, it had that spike sticking out of the dome. But these people, they decide that you just have to replace the whole dome with their dome, and their domes aren't even evenly molded, so it's just a real hassle to cut off the original dome and align their new dome, when all you really have to do is drill a tiny little hole at the end of the original dome and put the spike in. Much easier to drill a tiny little hole than cut the whole darn thing off, I think. And you can see in this picture just how easy that is. They have that little bullseye right in the middle that you can cut the hole in, right in the middle of the original piece. Now, once you glue everything together, here's what it looks like, at least when I did it. This model, I like to think it's easy to build, but every time I'm reminded that it's not. But it's still one of the easiest kits to build from the Star Trek models, and easy to paint too. You saw that only 7 colors were used here. Really, I only needed 6 colors. The silver was just extra because I screwed up. And though to get all the pieces aligned, you got to do a delicate balancing act when you glue everything together. And that's why you have the model glue sitting on one engine while the other one's sitting other, and you got the bottle of pills sitting on the saucer. So yeah, and that's also why there's the stack of DVDs there to hold the engines up while the glue sets. Speaking of gluing stuff in position, though, something else I came across was just how different the instructions were from the parts you get in some cases. This little piece here, if I remember to put the arrows, it's this piece here. You see that going onto the end of the engine. It's right next to where the dome goes. But it doesn't tell you which end faces forward, because you can see the piece has two very distinct ends. It's not symmetrical. There's the one end where those slotted grooves go, and they go all the way to the edge. Then there's the other end where the grooves stop, and then there's a small slope after that. But you can see in the instructions, it doesn't tell you where they go. And as you saw in the last video, that would be the case with the instructions up until 1983 or so, when they got this. In 83 onward, they had, at least 83 onward, could have been slightly earlier maybe, they had these new instructions where you got to this more detailed schematic of the ship and actual painting instructions instead of just eyeballing it based on what's on the box. And you can see here that there's more detail to that component on the fully assembled painted thing. But again, it doesn't look exactly like the piece you have here. You see that there's like 3 rectangular boxes sticking on it, but here you only have, well, you kind of have 3 rectangular boxes vaguely. It's a very abstract interpretation of what that is. But you can assume, though, based on how this picture looks, that the sloped end goes toward the rear, and the front end with the grooves down goes toward the front. But again, it's not entirely clear, so if you were to botch that, it's understandable. I actually botched it myself on a couple of models. I think I botched it on one of the models I showed you in the last video, in fact. Now here we go to putting the decals on. They're all water slide. So here they are lined up like this. And, I'm just going to take this moment to comment on the bridge dome here. This is the replacement dome I was telling you about earlier. It came from a 1/1000 scale Enterprise kit. And you can see that I forgot to cut off that little notch at the little blister at the end of it. Yeah, my bad. But by the time I realized that I didn't cut it off, well, it was too late. I'm pretty sure it was after I glued it, in fact. So there it sits. But that does kind of make sense with this ship, because the role it served in the comic book was leading an attack force. And in the Starfleet Command PC game from the late 90s, they have something called a command cruiser. So we'll say this is a command cruiser, and that extra blister is the extra communications stuff or whatnot that makes it a command cruiser. And it's probably integrated with some other equipment elsewhere in the ship. And that's why it doesn't look exactly like the other mirror universe starships. So there you go, a little backstory, and all inconsistencies are explained away. There's some more weathering that I accidentally added to it because I'm incompetent. You can see these little circles, those little white circles there next to the red stripe. That's from the water from drying from the decals. It dried up right on the hull, and it left those marks. I couldn't wipe them off or anything. But, it's just more weathering, adds more character to the ship, because, again, we'll just say it's toward the end of its service life. And you can see another place where I found placement for the sword through the earth marking right there in the upper left. You don't see that spot in the show either, so we can add a marking there without violating anything we see on camera. And just another little side note, the NCC 1790 you see in the lower right, that is actually supposed to be upside down on the main studio model, but again, this is the earlier studio model where that's actually right side up for that. So I don't know why they flipped it later on, but well, no, they probably flipped it later on because the camera saw the other side more, and so it was upright from the audience's perspective. Anyway, though, this is supposed to be the evil ship, though, so it gets flipped. And speaking of markings, this is from the original kit. You can see here how it tore. That just happened in the water. I didn't even touch it yet. I just put it in the water to soak for a little bit, and it tore in the water. These old markings are very fragile, so if you're just a beginner with this sort of thing, maybe you should just go with buy a set of new markings, off the internet or wherever, because those tend to stand up a little bit and be less fragile when handling them. These old ones, though, handle with care because they tear. It's not just this kit. It's the Refit Enterprise kit as well. These things just tear a lot. And here are the new markings I mentioned. You can see I used a bunch of them. And I'm going to hopefully remember to put an arrow here to point them out. But towards the lower left, you see those two gray curves and then the two dark gray curves, those are supposed to be on this ship, but you don't see them in the series. And what I mean by that is this. The the version of the studio model that they're trying to say that the evil Enterprise resembles, it had these markings on it. But then when you watch the digital remaster of the episode, you don't see these at all. So because you didn't see them, I didn't put them on. And now also I had improvised the little red strip that I mentioned earlier that you saw the watermarks next to. That actually came from this piece here. Hopefully got another arrow pointing at that. I had to cut it off a little bit there because the kit obviously doesn't come with that. And here is the ship compared to the regular universe, the evil ship compared to the regular universe. Look how dark and sinister that is compared to the bright, cheerful one below it. Now the one below it actually is painted pretty accurate to how it looked in the show, but before it got eaten up by the planet killer. Because when you see that in the show, they did use that particular model kit. They used an AMT Enterprise model kit from like the 1968 version or whatever to make their new ship, because they weren't going to modify the studio model, and the new ship was supposed to look like it went through a heavy battle. They're not going to wreck the studio model, so they just bought a model kit across the street and used that instead. And they just lightly painted it. They didn't go into as much detail with the paint as they did with the studio model. So that made this one very easy to do, and therefore you have a almost screen accurate main universe ship compared to the evil universe ship. You can just see the vast differences between the two universes. And speaking of differences, I figured I'd take this time also to talk about the differences in the decal sets that came with the ships. So this here is from the 2008-2009 re-release. All these markings were not extra. These came with the kit. The windows, the yellow circle on the bottom. Of course, that is where I replaced the Terran Empire logo, the sword through the earth, on my ship instead of that yellow circle. And I figured that was a good spot for it because the earth kind of matches that circle, a little bit of symmetry there. But also apparently, like, these are supposed to be sensitive points, like the ship's engine core or something ejects through one of those. And I figure, maybe the evil Empire, they'd be a little smarter about not showing where the weak spot on their ship is by doing that. And just as another comparison, here's the markings that go on the bottom from the kit as released from the late 70s through the end of its original tenure. And you can see here, all you get are those tiny little markings from the bottom of the saucer. And you can see those are actually smaller than the markings even on my ship. That's because for whatever reason, the markings on the saucer were smaller. The markings on the sides of the engines were bigger. So I just switched the two because I like the bigger ones the way they looked on the bottom of the saucer. They look more closer to the size you see in the show. But that's it. Very sparse, very sparsely populated on the bottom of the saucer from the older kit. And of course, here's the bottom of mine. There's 7 aftermarket ones. But again, these are all what you can see in the show. Quick side note here on the markings. The reason there's floor polish on the table and the reason why the markings look wet is because I applied floor polish to them. That's because you saw how easy these tore in water. These also tear pretty easily when they dry out too. Even the 2008-2009 kit, those things just tore right after applying them pretty much the moment they were dry if you touched them the wrong way. So I looked it up online, found out that this particular type of floor polish does pretty good at keeping them secure. So if you bump into the model or hold it on these markings with the floor polish dried up over them, then potentially they will survive. At least that's how it's been for my usage of this. And now, speaking of in the show, this actually, in this picture, in this lighting, it does look like it's kind of that dark gunmetal gray type color that's in the show. And you can see the smaller markings on the engines. They look a little bit better, I think, than the bigger ones did on there. And they make the engines actually look bigger by appearing smaller. And now also, I'm going to show another shot. This is as best as I could to match a scene from the actual episode. And You can see here that just as in the episode, you can't see the markings that I put. If you remember the arrows on the back of the saucer, on the top of the lower hull, and the bottom of the lower hull. So it all works out perfect. And you can see the different engines there as well, the different backs to them, perfectly integrated. So, yeah, in the episode, though, it's like this, where that section here is blurry, so you can't see if there's anything there or not. So you get to put your Evil Empire logo there, because again, it should be there somewhere on the outside. Just how garishly they did it for Captain Archer's ship 100 years before. You'd think that the Terran Empire wouldn't change much and would still have some pride after that time, especially after 100 years of conquest. Here's another angle of the ship, just matching a popular angle you see in the original show. What I mean by popular is this is used a lot in the show. And then here's another shot matching another angle that you see a lot in the show. Just showing off the finished product here. And that is it. Thank you for tuning in. You can see how relatively simple this is to build. You don't have that many markings you got to append to the ship. And as far as the changing the number goes, all you had to do was take the 06 and flip it upside down, and it became 90. And now instead of dealing with two different ones, you just have one little marking that you got to place. And the NCC-17, those all go together right next to each other on the sheet. So it's very easy. You don't have to hassle too much with the added markings just to get ISS Nixon, except for the name, though. The I really had to cut that up, but you can just make it U.S.S. Enterprise or ISS Enterprise, however you care to. But yeah, not so bad for beginners just getting their feet wet with this sort of model. Not that many types of paint that you use. Don't have too much to do with the markings. You can just do what the instructions said, like I showed in the last video. Not that hard. You got a nice little model there to sit on your shelf. And the average person, looking at it, they're just going to be like, oh, you built a model, cool. And then you get the Star Trek superfan who will probably give you a dissertation on why it's bad. Either way, you've made a new friend or an enemy for life. Attention is attention, whether good or bad. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and go celebrate 50 years of Watergate, I guess, with parades, piñatas, whatever you do for 50th anniversary. Gold plaque, because 50th anniversary is the golden anniversary, I guess. I'll just settle for my model of the evil universe Nixon. Though I don't really know why it be named Nixon in the evil universe, because if characters are their opposites over there, wouldn't Nixon have been a good guy or something?